My dad lifted his wine glass and announced, "Your sister just bought a beautiful new house. When will you finally catch up, Stella?" I pushed my chair back and walked out without a word. Thanksgiving at our home always felt like a production. No one ever admitted it, but everything was choreographed. The perfectly basted turkey set like a centerpiece from a magazine, the matching napkins folded at precise angles, the soft jazz playlist Dad insisted made us seem cultured. Even the jokes felt recycled, the same lines delivered by the same people year after year, as if we were stuck in a rerun of a holiday special that never ended. Every November, we sat at that huge mahogany table, pretending we were a picture-perfect family. And every November, Dad found a way to turn Carrara into the star of the evening. She was the golden child, the heir apparent, the daughter whose accomplishments were paraded like trophies. Dad would raise his glass, beam with satisfaction, and brag, "Your sister did this. Your sister achieved that." And then he'd glance at me with that smirk, the one that suggested I was the underachieving supporting character. "When will you catch up, Stella?" Laughter, the comfortable, dismissive kind. My aunts would giggle politely, my uncles would nod as if Dad had delivered a punchline. Meanwhile, I'd sit there smiling like a mannequin, pretending it didn't sting. That was always my role. Stella, the reliable one. The daughter who arrived early to chop vegetables, polish the silverware, and refill glasses. The person who brought the expensive wine so no one else had to. The helper who stayed in the background, praised only for being useful. The questions they asked me were always vague, placeholders more than actual curiosity. "Still doing that job? Ever finish that course you talked about?" They weren't cruel, but they were hollow, like they were checking a box rather than speaking to a real person with a real life. Carrara, on the other hand, was showered with admiration. Promotions, vacations, new projects, freshly redecorated rooms, and Dad bragging about her latest achievements like a publicist. Mom would beam and say, "She's just our little powerhouse." And Carrara would lower her gaze, smile modestly, but her eyes always sparkled with pride. I told myself years it didn't matter, that humility was a strength, that flying low kept me grounded. But each joke, each comparison, each subtle dismissal chipped away at me. I felt myself shrinking in a room full of people who didn't even notice I was getting smaller. I could trace the pattern all the way back to childhood. At 10, I won a statewide art contest. Carrara got a perfect attendance certificate. Guess which one Dad brought up at dinner? At 16, I passed my driving test on my first attempt. Carrara failed twice. Dad teased me that I probably sweet-talked the instructor. It was always like that. My achievements were flukes, hers were destiny. I internalized it. I allowed myself to become the muted version of someone who actually had ambition, dreams, talent. I waited for someone in my family to see me. No one did because they weren't looking. So I stopped waiting. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve yelling or slamming doors. It was simple. One year, I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I lied to my mom, told her I had a deadline at work. She accepted it without pushing back because asking why would require effort. That night, I sat in my quiet apartment with takeout noodles and fuzzy socks. A cheesy holiday movie played on my TV. I anticipated feeling lonely, maybe even guilty. Instead, the stillness wrapped around me like warmth. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself for comparisons, jokes, or pointed questions. The silence felt like breathing for the first time. And in that quiet, I heard myself ask, "Now what?" So I rebuilt my life, slowly, quietly. I said yes to freelance work people warned me was unstable. I pieced together clients, learned how to negotiate contracts, taught myself taxes, marketing, and networking at 3 in the morning. 6 months later, I was earning more than I had in 2 years of my previous job. 10 months later, I moved out of my cramped apartment into a space with real sunlight. And a little over a year after that, I bought a house. A real house. More than 4,000 square feet. No tiny rooms, no fixer-upper projects, just open space, quiet hallways, and the dignity of something I built on my own. I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't secrecy. It was protection. It was mine. A milestone too sacred to throw into the messy arena of comparison. But occasionally I wondered how my family would react if they knew. If Dad would be proud or claim he always believed in me. The calls never came. No one noticed my absence for 2 straight Thanksgiving dinners. No one asked where I was or how I was living. To them, my life only existed if they could measure it against Carrara's. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it sharpened things. It reminded me that I had been climbing a mountain they never saw. So, when this year's invitation arrived, I hovered over the button longer than I cared to admit. I almost chose no, but then I imagined myself in that room, not shrinking, not folding into myself, but taking up the space I'd earned. So, I clicked yes. Walking in that night, I carried nothing but a bottle of Pinot Noir and a steady, quiet confidence. Abby, my cousin, smiled warmly when she saw me. "You look incredible," she whispered as I found my seat at the far end. Dinner went through its usual motions: chatter, clinking glasses, Carrara's laugh floating over everything like perfume. I could see how everyone drifted around her as though she were the center of some gravitational pull. But for once, I didn't feel like a satellite. I felt grounded on my own planet. Dessert arrived. Dad's favorite pecan pie. And as if someone had flipped a switch, Dad rested his fork, dabbed his mouth, and announced like a ringmaster, "Well, your sister has some big news tonight. Carrara just bought a beautiful home. 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch. It's stunning." The room lit up with admiration. Then Dad turned to me, smiles sharp enough to cut. "Stella, when do you plan to catch up?" The moment, the line, the script. But this time, I didn't swallow it. I looked directly at him and said evenly, "I already did. I just didn't invite anyone who doubted me." The room went still. Not dramatically, but tightly, like the air shifted an inch to the left. Carrara froze. Trevor blinked. Mom stiffened mid-pour. Dad stared like he hadn't heard me correctly. "You did?" I lifted my water glass, took a slow sip, and nodded. "About a year ago." "A year?" Mom echoed, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you say anything?" It never came up. The simplicity of it tore through the room like truth finally landing in a place it had been denied for decades. Dad gave a short, clipped laugh, shaking his head. "That's vague, Stella." "It's not," I said. "You asked, I answered." He looked around the table, trying to find an anchor in the confusion. "So you bought a house?" he asked, disbelief dripping from his words. "I have," I replied. "Paid in full." That changed everything. The atmosphere shifted, confusion swirling into discomfort as everyone tried to recalibrate. Aunt Carl murmured an understated, "Oh." Trevor stared. Carrara's spine straightened. Dad blinked fast, unsure how to recover. "That's a lot of space for one person," he said, reaching for something to hold on to. "Maybe," I answered, reaching for a roll. "But without a mortgage, it's manageable." Calm, steady. No anger, just facts. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was realization. It was the room recognizing that for years they had written me out of the script, and now the script had changed. And Dad, searching for footing, fumbled for a tone he no longer controlled. Humor, disbelief, maybe even praise, but none of them landed. I watched as his smile flickered, then faded altogether. Kara was the first to speak. Of course she was. "That's great, Stella," she said, with the kind of syrupy sweetness that tried to sound supportive but landed hollow. "Buying a house is a big deal. You didn't want to share that with your family?" I met her gaze directly. "You mean the family that only ever asks how close I am to being like you?" Her expression cracked just slightly, a flicker in her eyes, a shift in her jaw. "I didn't hide it out of spite," I continued. "I just didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore." Dad leaned forward, trying to pull the conversation back into something he could steer. "So, what kind of work are you doing now? I thought you were still freelancing." "I was. Now I run my own consultancy. 6 clients under retainer." Mom blinked. 6? I nodded. "Financially independent. No loans, no help." Dad sat back in his chair like he'd been hit with a gust of wind. "Well," he said, latching on to the one thing he could, Kara's neighborhood is fantastic. Great schools, great long-term investment. Totally, I said, voice light. Although, technically, it's not her name on the deed. The table fell still. Kara's mouth parted. Excuse me? I kept my tone neutral. It's just what the records show. Trevor signed the mortgage. It's public info, you know. Registry of Deeds. Trevor flushed, looking like he'd rather disappear into his mashed potatoes. We're married, he mumbled. It's our house. Of course, I replied. But we both know how banks work. Kara's voice sharpened. Why would you even look that up? I didn't, I said. Someone sent it to me months ago. Said it was funny how I was always the one being compared when I was the only one not owing a bank anything. Dad raised a hand. Okay, this is getting out of hand. No, I said quietly. It's finally honest. And that's when I saw it. That flicker in Dad's eyes. Not anger, not pride, doubt. For the first time, he didn't know who the golden child at the table really was. Kara crossed her arms, her voice tight. I never asked to be compared. I nodded. Neither did I. But it happened anyway. Every holiday, every birthday, every time someone looked through me to get to you. The table was silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I'm not attacking, I said. I'm just done pretending. I reached for my glass and took a slow sip. I built something real. I just didn't need an audience to clap for me along the way. No one moved. Kara looked like she was holding her breath. Trevor's face was frozen, his fork untouched. Mom dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, lips trembling. And Dad? Dad looked older than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller, like a man who had built a worldview on a foundation that just cracked beneath his feet. Kara's voice came back low and brittle. For someone who didn't want attention, you sure timed this pretty perfectly. I tilted my head. I didn't time anything. You asked when I'd catch up. I simply answered. Trevor shifted uncomfortably beside her. Let's not make this a competition. It's always been a competition, I said gently. Just one I wasn't told I was in. That hit the table like thunder. Even Mom glanced at Kara. Really glanced at her for the first time, uncertainty behind her eyes. I kept going. I worked 12-hour days for 3 years. No vacations, no backup plan. I stayed up until 2 a.m. designing pitch decks and learning SEO. I taught myself contracts. I built everything from scratch. I looked around the table. No one asked. Not once. Aunt Carol, to her credit, blinked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You skipped 2 Thanksgivings. I nodded. And no one called. No one checked in. You just assumed I was floundering. That I was still the one behind. Kara scoffed. So what, you want applause? A parade for doing your job? No, I said. I wanted a family that didn't measure my worth by how closely I mirrored your life. She looked stunned, like I had spoken in a language she didn't know existed. I never claimed to be better, I added, but you all made it very clear I was somehow less. And I believed it until I realized your standards had nothing to do with me. The table didn't move. No one blinked. No one reached for their wine. You praised what you could measure. Square footage, job titles, curated photos, but not resilience, not risk, not doing the hard things in silence. Dad finally spoke, voice low. Why didn't you just tell us? I turned to him. Because it wouldn't have mattered. You already decided who I was a long time ago. You put me in a box labeled still trying and never looked inside. He inhaled sharply. That's not fair. It's not about fairness, I said. It's about pattern. Then I turned to Kara. You're not the villain, but you've never once used your voice to shift the spotlight. You stood in it because it was handed to you and never asked why. She stared at me. Guilt flickered in her eyes. Or maybe it was something deeper. Recognition. I didn't know. She said quietly, you didn't ask. I replied. And you never wondered why I stopped showing up? Mom's eyes welled up, her napkin trembling in her fingers. Stella, I didn't realize, she said, voice cracking at the edge. I know, I replied. Not with spite, but with exhaustion. That's the problem. The silence that followed wasn't confrontational. It was recognition, the sharp, undeniable kind, the kind that echoed in the quiet between words. Everyone at that table was suddenly aware of something they had refused to acknowledge. I had grown. I had arrived. And they hadn't seen a thing. The air felt different now. Not heavy, not awkward, just honest. I sat back steady, no longer trying to force understanding or reach for empathy that had never been offered. There was power in letting people sit with their own discomfort. I'd spent years holding space for them, patting their egos, laughing at jokes that chipped away at me 1 year at a time. I wasn't doing that anymore. Kara's voice broke the silence again, barely above a whisper. I didn't know you felt that way. I tilted my head. Did you ever ask? She blinked. I just thought you liked being low-key, that you didn't care about this stuff. I don't care about stuff. I care about being seen, not for what I post, not for what I wear, just for who I am.
Trevor looked at Kara, then at me, his voice awkward. You really paid it off? The house? I nodded. Every cent. No loans, no cosigner, just me. He leaned back, stunned. Damn. Kara looked like she was unraveling internally, her well-practiced poise faltering. So, you came here just to drop that on us? To make us feel bad? I shook my head. No, I came to dinner because I was tired of pretending I was still trying to catch up. I'm not. I just never asked anyone to clap for me along the way. Aunt Carol shifted in her seat. You always seemed so quiet. I was quiet, I said, not small. And that's when I looked to Dad, really looked at him, the man who had spent decades measuring me against a checklist he only understood. You wanted me to catch up, I said, but I was never behind. You just never looked. His face slackened, and in that moment he looked like someone trying to reconcile two versions of a story he thought he knew. You're right, he said, barely audible. That was all I needed. I folded my napkin and stood. The movement was smooth, deliberate. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't walking out of rage. I was walking out because the chapter had ended. Mom stood slightly. Stella, wait. I met her gaze with something softer than she expected. You always wanted me to come home, I said gently, but never once asked if I was okay. You just wanted updates you could brag about, not the truth of who I was becoming. Her mouth opened, but the words didn't come. I turned to Kara next. We don't have to be close, but it would have meant something if just once you'd pulled me aside and asked how I was doing, really doing. No filters, no followers, just sister to sister. Her eyes shimmered, no defense left, just silence. Finally, I turned to Dad, the man whose approval I had once chased like oxygen. You built a world where success looked one way, where love had conditions. I didn't fit, so you didn't see me. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. Stella? I don't need an apology, I said. I just needed the truth to be heard. No one moved. No one begged me to stay. And for once, that felt like progress. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my purse. No tears, no outbursts, just clarity. Peace. The door clicked open behind me. The cold air rushed in, stinging my skin in the most refreshing way. I paused at the threshold, turning just slightly. I was never the one who needed to catch up, I said, one last time, and I walked out. Not one person called after me, not a single attempt to stop me. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like release. The walk to my car was slow and silent. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just still. I slid into the driver's seat, let the engine hum to life, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, watching my breath fog the window. I could still see the outline of the house in the rearview mirror. Warm lights, laughter, the clink of dishes. The show went on without me, and that was okay. For so many years, I thought leaving meant failure, that if I walked out, I was giving up. But as I sat there, engine purring beneath me, I realized something. I hadn't walked out to escape them. I had walked out because I had finally found myself, and I wasn't willing to leave her behind to keep playing a part in their script. Out here in the cold evening air, I wasn't the girl with the folding chairs. I wasn't the forgotten sister or the unfinished version of someone else's success. I was Stella, the woman who built her life quietly, completely, and without compromise. There was no applause, no spotlight, no, we were wrong. But I didn't need it anymore. I remembered something my grandfather once told me when I was 13, sitting on his porch while everyone else took family photos I wasn't invited to. He leaned over, handed me a mug of hot cocoa, and said, "You don't have to shine in their light. You just have to stop forgetting you have your own." That voice echoed in me now, strong, clear. I had spent so long trying to be understood. Now I just needed to be true. They could stay at that table passing by and pretending nothing cracked, but something had. Not in anger, but in awareness. The way a mirror breaks when it finally reflects too much truth. And when they eventually sat down next year, maybe they'd notice the empty chair. Maybe they'd remember what was said, not because it was loud, but because it was real. Maybe Kara would finally wonder what it cost me to sit silently year after year. Or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I was free. No more approving, no more shrinking, no more waiting to be seen in a house built to overlook me because I wasn't behind. I had already arrived, and I wasn't going back. Have you ever been made to feel like the afterthought at your own family table? Like your quiet success didn't count because it didn't come with applause? Share your story in the comments. I'll be reading. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more stories of resilience, truth, and quiet power. You're not behind. You're just not where they expected you to be. And that's your power.